I'm Caron Foley, the host of Authors Night here at the Calabasas Library. Our guest today is Leonard Morpurgo, the author of Kings and Queens and Movie Stars.
Yes.
It is a true revelation expose of a Hollywood publicist.
That's me.
That's you. And you are today still doing it.
Yes, I've been doing it for a very long time.
How long?
I started in this business in 1960, and I'm still working at it.
Where do you work now?
Well, I work and for the last 11 years for a PR agency called Weissman Markowitz Communications. We represent, I think, 7 or 8 television networks. We work with the major studios on their awards program. We represent a couple of unions and independent films that come and go. You know, they're not permanent, but the other ones are hopefully, touch wood, long time. And as I mentioned, I was recently at Comic-Con, and been doing that for 11 years on behalf of a client, organizing panels. It's a wonderful thing. Production designers, illustrators, people who work in the art department. We represent cinematographers too, so-called below-the-line people.
But what exactly does a publicist do?
Well,
what is your job description?
It's very complex because it depends totally on what we're involved with. The things mostly in this book, which goes back to the 1960s, I was at that time head of publicity and promotions for Columbia Pictures in Europe. And my job was to make sure that the films were distributed properly into different countries, to take stars, directors, producers on personal appearances. But it's changed a lot. The whole business has changed, obviously, in those years.
From what I read in the book, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I had some wonderful things, but it's changed enormously what we do today. You have the social media, which didn't exist back in those days, and it's easier and it's more complicated today than it was back then. It's easier because you've got all these different places you can go to. I'll give you one example. I used to go frequently to the Cannes Film Festival, representing different clients or working with the studio. And every day I would have a press release, a different press release about a film that was showing there, whatever. And I would personally walk it to where in paper in hand, to where the different trade publications had their offices. One year I calculated, walking backwards and forwards on the Croisette, which is the main station, the main street, in Cannes, I walked 100 miles in 12 days. But today, with email, there's no reason for me to go there. I don't need to hand a piece of paper over to an editor and here's a press release for you. Please publish it. You send an email, and I don't have to be in Cannes anymore.
But you went to so many exciting different places.
Yes.
All over the world.
Yeah.
You lived and worked, a constant traveler.
Yeah, it was great.
And all the people that you met, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
You met all the movie stars, all the glamorous people, all the famous people, and all the most glamorous and famous of cities throughout the world.
Yeah, and in those days, I was single and would travel week after week to a different place, different country. And they used to say a sailor has a girl in every port. I had a girl at every airport. Well, not exactly. But
oh, yes, you did, according to your book. I read every page. You led an unbelievable, enviable life.
Yeah, and people who know me now and who work with me and do the same kind of thing that I do now, they said, I didn't know you did any of that stuff.
Well, your responsibilities were incredible, but how did you were quite the storyteller here, but I was wondering how the people that you mention in the book reacted when their names were put in the book.
I didn't tell them, and a lot of them are dead.
Well, that was easier then.
Yes. I didn't say, hey, do you mind if I tell this story? No.
I mean, the exposés.
Yeah, yes, they're there. But as people have said, I don't think I'm nasty about any of the stories I tell.
No, but they're all juicy and very sexy.
Yes, some of them are.
Most of them are.
That's true.
And you certainly played a part in a lot of them.
Yes. Well, it's funny, when I first wrote a draft of this of this book, I kept myself out of it. I was just the observer, and friends who read it say, no, you're going to bring yourself into this book. And so I rewrote it, and I did.
Well, you were like the third person on Cary Grant's honeymoon trip.
That's true, yes.
How did that come about?
Well, it was, I think, it was in the 60s. I forget the year. It's in the book. I was working for Columbia Pictures, and I was told by head office in New York, I was in Paris, that Cary Grant would be coming to Paris on his honeymoon with Diane Caron, and they wanted me to look after him because he was about to shoot or to film what turned out to be his last movie called Walk, Don't Run, and that was going to be filmed later that year. So they were being very kind to him, and so I was asked to be with them. And in fact, I was with them breakfast, lunch, dinner, all day until they went to bed. He wanted me there at all times because he was not used to taking care of himself. He always had people to do it. And so I was the caretaker, if you like, and it's very strange. He was charming, very nice. He only got upset once when I took him to a restaurant. He was paying, and he thought it was way too expensive. In fact, it was probably like $20 in those days, back in the early 60s. But apart from that, he was very pleasant. He treated his wife, Diane, who was a young woman at the time, obviously, almost like a child. And he played hangman with her. You know the game?
Yes.
You know the word game?
The kids play.
Yeah, and he did that with her. But with me, he wanted to talk deep philosophical discussions under the probably mistaken impression that I was knowledgeable about these things. But being a publicist, you're able to work with it, you know, to give the impression that you do know. And I got back from my days as a journalist, because I was a newspaper reporter before this, and we'd interview all kinds of experts and knew just enough, a little bit of everything, but not everything about anything. And so I learned how to know enough to appear knowledgeable.
We seem to have gotten along really well with Lee Marvin also, who I understand was not that easy to get along with.
Yeah, Lee Marvin did have a reputation, and he drank a lot, and I took him to Amsterdam for the premiere of Sam Fuller's film, The Big Red One. And he says, don't let me drink anything. He says, I maybe I'll have a beer, but you know, I don't want to get drinking because then I get insufferable. Make sure I don't drink. So we go there to Amsterdam, and we're having dinner with the manager of the distribution company that was handling the film. And he was so proud of his wines, he insisted and he insisted. And finally, Lee said, okay, I'll have a glass of wine. And it actually did not take much to get him over the top. He didn't drink that much. And I went back to his room with him. We were leaving the next morning for London, I believe. And I went, and he confessed to me that he thought he had been responsible for his father's death. He hadn't actually killed him or shot him, but he was...
How did his father die?
I don't remember, but I remember him making this great confession to me. But one flattering thing he said after we all got back to United States. I was here in Los Angeles. He was in Tucson, I think. And he called me, he was on the phone for about 45 minutes and said he'd done dozens of these, hundreds of these interviews and press appearances, but he'd never had so much fun as he had with me. Because it's there, you have to have a certain attitude, I think, when dealing with movie stars, famous people. The wrong way to do it is to say, "Oh, Mr. Marvin, I'm so honored to meet you." That kind of thing. You talk to a person as an equal, and when they see that you know what you're doing, then they're relaxed and you become friends. And same thing with Cary Grant. Can I read you a little bit of this letter I got
Yes,
from Cary?
please.
This is a letter I got from Cary Grant. He typed it himself. There it is. And thanking me after he got back to L.A. I took him to a little restaurant where I would go regularly. It was very, very inexpensive. He loved it. And as he was leaving, the owners asked if they could have his autograph. He says, "I'll do better. I'll send you a photograph." So he wrote this letter to me. "Here is a photograph for your friends, the proprietors of L'Étoile d'Or. Since they didn't give you their first names, I merely signed it to the Constantines. Anyway, and more importantly, it brings with it Diane's and my affectionate and appreciative thoughts to you for all your kindness and trouble on our behalf and for your constantly cheerful company." And then he goes on to say, "Thank you, Leon, and please thank anyone else who so kindly helped our need for a few happy unpublicized days in Paris. With fond and grateful thoughts and a few relaxed deep breaths for each morning and evening and between times too." And then he says, "Why do we call you Leonard? It's Leon, isn't it? Isn't it?" And I was a bit offended that he didn't remember my name. It is Leonard, not Leon, until I saw that he had misspelled his wife's name, Diane, which we all know is D-Y-A-N, and he spelt it the more regular name. That way I didn't feel too bad.
But he said you were so easy to get along with. I don't think Steve McQueen felt that way. You seem to have gotten into a fight with him.
No, Steve McQueen didn't. They don't all feel that way. Steve McQueen was a strange, very difficult man. He came to Paris with, was it Natalie Wood? No, Ali McGraw, excuse me. Came with Ali McGraw to Paris, and they weren't married yet at that time. And his company, the company of which he was part owners, had hired me to do publicity for him in Paris for the film The Getaway. And he arrives and doesn't want to do anything. And how did I find out what hotel he was staying at? Well, you know, the company told me. And he looked at me and he did this thing that I just don't like. They beckoned me to come to him. You know, people want to talk to me, they can come to me. I don't mean I'm important, but you know, imperious beckon. And he said to me, I had a sort of a lamb's wool overcoat. He says, "Don't you dare ever wear that coat in my presence. Take it home and burn it."
Why?
He didn't like it. And anyway, as he sort of tentatively agreed to do one interview at Le Mans to show that his alley where he had made the film about Le Mans. And we were the next day I was going to meet him over there with a reporter from Paris Match, which was the big magazine in France. Anyway, as he's leaving the hotel to get into this rented Mercedes that he had, the photographer pops up and he starts screaming at the photographer. And, "How did you find out I was here?" And he looked at me. I said, "I didn't tell anybody." And he gets in his car and knocks with the car, doesn't run him over, but knocks the driver or the photographer over. And and he immediately pulls back and he says, are you all right? And the guy says, yes, but if I could take your pictures. And then he starts all over again. I said, Steve, get in the goddamn car, drive. I will take care of the photographer. So I kept getting in the photographer's way, and Steve McQueen went off. So we had been promised a cover of Paris Match. I get to Le Mans, and they'd been staying at a hotel with the photographer. And Ali McGraw comes down first. She said, I felt very bad what he said about your coat. But he said the same thing to me this morning. He said, every time you wear that coat, we have an argument. So throw it away. So she put it in the trash or whatever in the hotel room as a gift for the maid. And then he comes down, he says, I want to shoot only black and white. I said, black and white? We won't get a cover with black and white. He said, I don't care, only black and white, or no photographs. Photographer shrugs his shoulders, hard to say, and said, whatever. And we got a little tiny picture towards the back of the magazine.
Instead of the front cover?
Instead of the front cover. So he was difficult.
Well, it's difficult now to say I'm putting everybody on pause.
Okay.
We're going to take a quick break and come back to Kings and Queens and Movie Stars.
Where is this guy? So thirsty.
I hear he travels from the north.
Look!
That one's really dry.
LA is in a drought, yet over half of our drinking water is being used for landscaping. But it doesn't have to be that way. Just 1 inch of rain can yield thousands of gallons of water for use in landscaping and saves drinking water for drinking. Rain barrels, cisterns, and curb cuts are just a few ways to save water and energy. For more, visit LADWP and the Bay Foundation online.
We're back of Kings and Queens and Movie Stars.
Yes.
Well, we've gone from the actors and the actresses. Let's go to the royalty.
Oh, we have a bunch of those.
What stuck out in my memory when I read the book was a tale from the Duke of Windsor. You have 3 separate stories about him.
Yeah.
And an excerpt that I would like to hear from the book about him.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the main story first so that it doesn't go on too long. The Columbia Pictures, with a movie produced, or documentary produced by a gentleman called Jacques Levienne, was called A King's Story. And it was a documentary about the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, how they met, and how he was forced to abdicate because he married not only a divorcee, but, my God, an American.
The worst.
And you can imagine, I mean, really. But most people know this story. Wallis Simpson was the woman. And there've been all kinds of films about him. This was the first and only documentary where he was interviewed for the prologue and for the epilogue at the end of the film. And I think they'd had the world premiere in London, but he couldn't make it. First of all, I don't think he was allowed in London. But he'd been in the hospital, maybe he'd had cataract surgery, he had eye surgery, and his eyes were kind of sensitive. And I spent at least 2 months working with him and the Duchess on the guest list and on the drinks and the food and the canapes and all the rest of it. It was very important. The Duchess told me that I had J&B whiskey because that's the whiskey he drank. And in fact, I don't know if they still have it on the bottles, but it says by appointment to the royal family or something on the bottles. And so we spent a lot of time together. Then the moment came. I didn't have any colleagues working with me because it was the time of the Cannes Film Festival and everybody was away. So I was the only executive there from Columbia Pictures working on it. And it was, we had booked the Palais de Chaillot for the screening. And the Duke arrives and good evening, sir, and you come in, and I accompanied him up the stairs. We had to go up to the theatre, and all the flashbulbs start popping, and the Duke says, "Turn out those lights, turn off those lights," and his eyes were hurting. And he says, "I said turn off those damn lights." Nobody took any notice of him. Maybe they didn't understand English, I don't know. And he says to me, said to the crowd, "Don't you know who I am? I don't need any publicity. I was the King of England." Oh my God, the man was drunk, you know, and I didn't know what to do. So I managed to get him into the, we had 2 seats in front of everybody else, and frantically trying to get the projectionists to start the film, and the camera people, the press were in there flashing photos, and I trying to push them out one door and they go out the other. And then finally the film gets started, and I apologized to the, well, we were the press, we were here, we invited, why can't we take pictures? I said, there's a bar there, there's food there, eat and drink as much as you like. When the film is over, I promise you, I'll give you 10 minutes with the Duke and Duchess. Would that be all right? Yeah, okay. I said that I had no idea if I would be able to do that. But in fact, the film ended and I went up to him and he said to me, and he was crying because he'd just seen himself abdicate. And he says, "I don't mind telling you, Leonard, this has made me cry. It was a wonderful film." And one photographer snuck in and got him his picture, and that went all over the world of him crying. And I said, "Would you mind having 10 minutes with photographers?" And he said, "Not at all, not at all." He says, "Let them have as long as they like." So he stayed for a while, and when he left, my legs kind of turned to jelly. I didn't realize how nervous I was. But that's that story. But if you don't mind, I'll read a couple of short ones that follow on from that. I write here, "In the following months, I became friendly with the Windsors. They invited me to their home, and I invited them to private screenings of films I thought would interest him. One day I received a call from Jacques Levienne in London. Apparently he had just spoken to the Duke, who told him he had seen the film Ship of Fools. The movie had not yet been released, and Levienne pointed this out. 'How did you get to see it?' he asked. 'I was invited by my friend,' said the Duke. 'Which friend would that be?' 'Leonard Morpurgo.' At which point I went, humph! I said when Levienne told me this, what a name dropper. Anyway, that was me having fun. And then I got another short story. Sometime later, the Duke's equerry asked me if I could set up a screening. They had received from the States a 60mm black and white print of yet another documentary on his life, and he was curious to see it. I blocked off a couple of hours the next afternoon at a small private screening room on the Champs-Élysées. The Duke and his equerry arrived on time, and the 3 of us sat down to watch the familiar story unfold. Probably the man most responsible for forcing the abdication of King Edward VIII was the British Prime Minister at that time, Stanley Baldwin. When Baldwin appeared on the screen, the Duke turned to me and blew a very loud and most royal raspberry. And that was that story.
Well, what about your encounters with Peter Sellers? That struck kind of a chord with me. I had never known his health issues.
Yeah, well, first of all, to set the scene here, Peter Sellers made a wonderful film co-starring with Shirley MacLaine called Being There.
Loved the film.
And it was just a lovely film. And before we made the film, we were at the Cannes Film Festival, and we had a big party for a couple of hundred distributors from around the world, and Peter Sellers was there. And I went over and asked him if he would like to say a few words to the assembled crowd. And he said, no, they just want me to do some shtick, and I don't want to do that. So then I was working for Lorimar Pictures at the time, who made the film. So then the chairman of Lorimar Pictures, Merv Adelson, came over, and he asked him to do it. Well, Peter Sellers couldn't turn down the bus, so he went up on stage and did 20 minutes of the shtick said he didn't want to do, and I had a pain in my stomach from laughing. I've even got a photograph somewhere, it's not in the book, of me laughing at him. And he was, he was doing nonsense Russian, and I shouldn't try to copy him because I'm not Peter Sellers, but he was very, very funny. And the next year, the film had been made and was screened in competition in Cannes, and everybody had told him, and including me, we were quite convinced he would get the Best Actor award. I don't believe he'd had any major awards in his life, believe it or not. At least that's what he told me. So he was in the hospital. He'd had a heart attack, and against doctor's orders, he came to Cannes, and he stayed at the Hotel du Cap, which is very famous just outside of Cannes, in Cap d'Antibes. And twice, I think, I had to postpone press conferences because he wasn't well enough. Finally, he did do a press conference, and he was great, and went back to the hotel. Then came the morning of when they announced the awards, and it did not go to him, and it was an obvious scam. It went to a French actor who was in an Italian movie, and he was dubbed. It was not even his own voice. So it was, it was disgusting how they stole that from Peter Sellers. Anyway, as I'm on the phone, I go back, call him on the phone to tell him this, and a British journalist whose name I won't mention, who Sellers detested because he thought that he had tried to ruin his marriage, he said, "Oh, is that Peter you got on the phone?" I said, "Yes." He said, ask him if I could talk to him, if I could come over and see him. And I couldn't say no. He was right there, and I forwarded the request to Peter. He said, "Oh, yes, of course. I'll be in the Hotel du Cap restaurant. I'll be in the restaurant waiting for him. And I'd love to see him." And I'm really surprised at this. He says, "And when he gets here, I'll have this tureen of hot soup, which I will pour all over his head." Needless to say, the interview did not happen. A few months later, I think it was like 3 months later, I was back in Los Angeles at an early screening of the film Victor Victoria. And this was directed by Blake Edwards, and the music was by, now I've lost the name, but who did the Pink Panther, who did all the Peter Sellers music, very famous composer. And we were all there watching the film, and so the composer could see the film and start composing the music for Victor Victoria. Suddenly the film stops, the lights went on, and somebody came out and told us that they just learned that Peter Sellers had died. And I was there with Blake Edwards, who did all the Clouseau films with him. So it was a very sad occasion. But and that was the end of the Peter Sellers story.
That is sad.
Yeah.
But of all these nice, wonderful, was it Henry Mancini?
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yes, Henry Mancini. Right.
All these wonderful, pleasant experiences. Was there anybody who you'd say was the nastiest, the worst person, the most impossible to deal with?
Well, I've already told you about, what's his name?
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen. Very famous was Otto Preminger, who was famously difficult to get on with. He hated actors. He called them cattle. He was really nasty with people.
That's how he made his money.
Well, he was a very good director and made all kinds of wonderful movies. And I was with him on the stage of the Paris Opera House, which is an enormous stage.
Beautiful stage.
Beautiful, of course. And we were going to have the premiere of a film called The Cardinal. I don't know if you remember that. And so we were going over stuff on the stage, and he said to me, Morpurgo, go find me a phone book. We didn't have cell phones and that kind of thing, obviously, back then. And I sort of went into the offices around the stage area. I couldn't find a phone book or anybody to ask. And he's screaming, I'm like, where's my goddamn phone book? Anyway, so this is the kind of man he was. And I worked with him on several films. And one, I think, was Bunny Lake is Missing. Laurence Olivier, various people were in it. And it was being shot in London in a house, the headquarters for the base camp, if you like, for the film was in a very fancy neighborhood place on a street called Carlton House Terrace. And we were shooting like at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I asked somebody where the toilet was. And he said, well, mate, you got to go down the street, you turn left, and you come to an alleyway. You go down this alley, and at the end of the alley, you'll see a wooden door. That's the loo there. The loo is the toilet, as most of people know. And so I do this, and I turn into the alley, and I heard this Germanic voice, "Und Mr. Columbia, what are you doing here?" And it was Otto Preminger. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Preminger, actually, I'm looking for the lavatory." He says, "Come with me, I will show you." And we walked down the alley, and he points to the doorway, and I said, "Thank you so much." And before I could shut my mouth, I said, "You know, you must be the most highly paid lavatory attendant in the world." Fortunately, he was in a good mood, and he laughed. So that's my Otto Preminger story.
Well, we'll get back to the great beauties with whom you've worked in our next episode. So
Okay.
Stay tuned for Of Kings and Queens and Movie Stars.
We need to stop pretending we have plenty of water. Los Angeles is in a drought, but there are ways you can help. Replacing lawns with rain gardens and California-friendly plants is just one of many solutions. For more info on conserving water and saving energy, please visit LADWP and the Bay Foundation online.
We're back at Author's Night with Leonard Morpurgo of Kings and Queens and Movie Stars. You were going to discuss some of the great beauties, and I want to also hear your most embarrassing moments.
Well, actually, the most embarrassing moment does concern a great beauty. So if you like, I'll go to that first.
Okay.
Leslie Caron, who, as you know, was a wonderful beauty and a very famous dancer. And she came to Copenhagen, and this was in November 1963, for the local premiere of a film called The L-Shaped Room. And the night before, I was going to host a party, but the night before there were just the two of us. So I took her to a restaurant where they had a dance band, and I asked her asked if she wanted to dance. We got on the floor, and the band immediately stopped playing what they were playing and started playing the theme song from her film Lily, which was a Viennese waltz. And I'm tripping and stumbling over her. And I said, "I can't do the Viennese waltz." And she grinned, and we sat down. But it was very embarrassing that everybody's looking, you know, this famous dancer with this unknown man there, and he can't dance. And I've had a few other embarrassing
Well, she,
moments.
I understand, was quite a charming woman.
Oh, yes.
And very kind. I taught her granddaughter dancing
Really?
years and years and years ago, and she came up, she said, my grandmother is Leslie Caron, and I've got to learn how to dance too. And she told me some wonderful stories about what a gentle, kind woman that Mrs. Caron was.
Yeah, oh, she was fine. Yeah, she was a lovely woman. And I first met her in San Sebastian, where we had the premiere of that same film at the San Sebastian Film Festival, and she was charming, absolutely. Among the other people that I met is Sophia Loren at her peak. Still a beautiful woman today, but at the peak she was in her 20s, and I took the entertainment editor of a London newspaper to Rome to meet with her. And when we got there, we found she was in New York, and there was apologies, and both the reporter or the editor and I got permission to stay on in Rome for a few days. I lived in London at that time, and so we had a great time. He loved circuses, so we went to the circus, which I don't particularly like. And we're sitting on a bus, and do you say call them bus conductors here? The man who takes your ticket, or used to take your tickets on a bus. They used to do that, you know. And he said, "Isn't it wonderful to be in here, in Rome, to see Sophia Loren?" And I to this day, I don't know how he knew, or it was just coincidence, how he knew that this gentleman and I were actually there to see Sophia Loren. Anyway, she did arrive, and she was charming, charming, charming. And she was always on the phone with her husband, caro mio this and caro mio that. But she was lovely and very sweet, and I was very happy to meet her. I worked with a lot of drunken British actors, that's true. But the women were never drunk, but the men did get absolutely drunk at that time. And of course, Elizabeth Taylor, I worked with her on, I forget the movie, it was a Shakespeare thing. Taming of the Shrew, that was it, The Taming of the Shrew. That was, and Gina Lollobrigida, and my goodness, who else? I don't remember. I forget these women because I'm happily married, and that's the only woman I think of now.
How diplomatic.
Yes.
But you've written other books, not about movie stars.
Yeah.
Tell us about your other books.
Well, the other books, which unfortunately have not been published, but I had great fun writing them. The first one I wrote was called The Man with 9 Lives, and it's about a man who almost drowned. And, you know, they say when you're drowning, you remember your past life. Well, this man remembered all his past lives and goes to a hypnotist, or rather psychiatrist, who hypnotizes him. And he starts to remember all these past lives, and they become of who he is now. And it doesn't really work out too well for him. But all through history, you know, from Dickensian England to Venice in the 16th century, all these kind of things. I had a lot of fun writing that. Then the second book I wrote is called Loving Tessa, and it's about a woman. The title could mean she is a person who loves, and she is a person who is loved. And it's about a woman who has many affairs and is born in England, marries a French government minister, and goes to Los Angeles and produces movies. And it's actually based on the life of a friend of mine. And then the third book is called Day One. And it is, what is amazing to me about this book and other books that I've written is that you come up with something in your mind, and you find out later that it really is true. So this is set in 12,000 years ago initially, and in what is today China, about a young man who is very clever and who is brought into the 21st century. I don't call it a time machine. I call it, I forget what I called it. It's not a time machine. And he is taught modern, how agriculture and how to take care of animals. Because in his original life, he was a hunter-gatherer. But it was found that, and I found out later that this was absolutely true, that suddenly agricultural cultivation suddenly came to effect, and husbandry of animals came to effect about 12,000 years ago in the very part of the world where I had situated the story. So the idea is that the only way that this could have happened is somebody could have come from the future and taught them how to do this. And this is what the story is about. He goes through all kinds of crazy adventures.
Now, can people buy those books too, or just this one? And where can they get this one?
That's the only one. The others, I say, are not published. This one, yes, they can get this book of Kings and Queens and Movie Stars on Amazon. And if they want to go to my website, it's my name, leonardmorpurgo.com. And there's all kinds of photographs there and information there about the book.
What's your next book?
Oh, I don't have any plans for a next book. My hobby, believe it or not, these days is needlepoint.
Needlepoint?
Yeah, I do landscapes, original landscapes in needlepoint.
Really?
But that's a whole nother interview.
You're multifaceted. Well, I want to thank you very, very much.
It's my great pleasure.
It's my pleasure, too. I felt I've met all these people after I finished your book. I picked it up and I took it with me on a trip and I couldn't put it down.
Well,
it
that's
was a
what
wonderful
happens.
book.
It works every time because I have special glue attached to the book so that people, they have it and they can't put it down.
I knew there was a secret. But I felt I knew them, and I felt I knew you too once I read it. And
Well,
they
now
say,
you do.
as the saying goes, you're the same person today as you'll be 5 years from today, except from the books that you read and the people that you meet.
Well, thank you.
So I've learned a lot and met a lot of people through you, and I thank you for today's interview.
That is certainly my pleasure.
And I thank the Media Operations Department, the library, and the City of Calabasas, and you, our audience. And goodbye from Caron Foley and our Author's Night.